Today on episode 76, I'm discussing how to get students to successfully work cooperatively with their peers. Now, of course, this is just a fancy way of saying working in groups. And many teachers have students work in groups on assignments, but there are also quite a few that limit it or are resistant to it. They don't like the potential for chaos and bad behaviors, so for the most part, they avoid it. So in this episode, I'll discuss the pros and cons of cooperative or collaborative learning, as well as my tips for how to make it not only work in your classroom, but increase student achievement. Okay. Welcome to the Teachers Need Teachers podcast, a proud member of the Education Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kim Laprie, and this is the podcast for new and beginning teachers who don't want to just survive those first few years, but actually thrive. I am super happy to bring you this somewhat brief episode today because I truly believe in the power of group work. I've even converted some reluctant teachers who now fully embrace it. But before I get started, I wanted to thank you, first of all, for coming out every single week to listen to this podcast. It really, really means a lot to me, to the point where I even went to a podcasting conference around mid-August so that I could learn how to make this podcast even better. Now, here's the thing. I love that I get emails from you guys, first of all. I hear from a lot of you who have questions or comments or tell me how a particular episode helped you, and I seriously can't get enough of that. I get so excited when I get emails from you guys, and I do respond to every single one of them. And I love that I can provide this information for you, but what I want to do is to continue to give you exactly what you need and when you need it. And the best way for me to do that is to ask you to tell me what you need. So I've actually created a survey that I'm asking that you fill out. You can find it at teachersneedteachers.com/survey. And it's also going to be in the show notes. So wherever you're listening, I don't know if you've ever seen the show notes before, maybe you just press play, but there are, a list of notes, a synopsis of what this episode is about, and then some links. So I'm going to put the link to the survey in the show notes, and I would love it if every single one of you listening right now would complete this. The benefit of completing this survey is that you are going to decide what future episodes of this podcast are going to be about. And as a result of getting feedback from my listeners, this is why I went and sought out experts on being an elementary school teacher, on classroom management. Why can't I think? As a result of getting feedback from my listeners, I went out and looked for experts on things like foreign language, on collecting data, on IEPs. Just think about all of the interviews that I've done. This is because while I have general knowledge, I'm a 7th grade English teacher and I'm not an expert in those particular areas. However, I want you to benefit from what you need. So please take the time to complete the survey. You can find it at teachersneedteachers.com/survey, or you can click on the show notes below. Or you can click on the link in the show notes below, wherever you're listening, and it won't take you too long to complete it, but I promise the benefit to you will be great because you're going to keep wanting to come back for every single episode, because it's going to be almost like I'm reading your mind, because I am, and I'm going to have these awesome episodes for you every single week. All right. And then okay. I'm sure you guys know this, but it's pretty much impossible to keep students on task and in complete silence for an entire period. Some of you may like that feeling of just having them listen to you and looking up to you, while some of us don't necessarily want it all the time. That's definitely me. I want my students to listen when I have to give direct instruction, but otherwise, if I'm asking for their input or I want them to participate, I absolutely hate silence. Those students may be playing the role of a student who's working when it's absolute silence though. Have you ever seen that, where it looks like they're paying attention, but really they're not? I said they not, you guys. Plus, students who are sitting there looking at you, they're probably just playing the role of a student who's working, but in reality, they're tuning out from the lack of opportunity to talk to their peers. They need a mental break. I mean, think about it when you're at a staff meeting. It's hard for adults to sit in silence as well. Or think of when you're in professional development and someone is talking at you for a long time. How long can you give them your undivided attention before you want to check your phone, you want to check your email, you start doodling, you start looking around, maybe you have a conversation with your neighbor, and it definitely applies to students. So one of the things that I love about group work or any kind of collaborative learning is that it does switch gears for students and it keeps them on task for most of the period. So along with that, there are other benefits to cooperative learning. First of all, multiple brains are always better than one. Students struggle through an activity and they tend to fill in each other's gaps in knowledge when they're working together. I've seen so many times where a student just sort of keeps going down this rabbit hole and they keep answering questions incorrectly because there's no one there to catch their misconceptions. When you work in a group, yes, sometimes someone will point out that you're incorrect, but at least you know that you're incorrect and you can fix your course. But if it's just you working by yourself and then a teacher grades it, by the time we grade it as teachers, they've already decided that this is the right answer. We've already moved on and they didn't have a chance to really work it out. They didn't know any better. Also, students end up teaching each other. So with my last example, if we're working together in a group and you have an answer that I think is incorrect, we're going to talk about it. And if it turns out that in fact you were right, I just learned something, and vice versa. So students, they inadvertently teach each other and help clear up misunderstandings, which is definitely a benefit. They become actively engaged in their own learning. Also, there's the productive struggle. When students are trying to problem solve together, there's just this sense of we're in this together, and that really does help them push through. I don't know if you've seen them try to tackle something that really stumps them, but they are so engaged at that moment, and I absolutely love seeing that. So the productive struggle part in a group is much better than just the productive struggle individually. They also obviously learn life skills. It's important to be able to work with other people. And this year I've had several students say, you know what, I just work better together. Or, you know what, Ms. LaPree, I just honestly prefer to not work with my peers because blah, 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 blah. They give me all these reasons, or I try to avoid group work. And I get it, working by yourself means that you can focus, that you can do things your way. And while there are some solo jobs, especially now that we're more of a gig economy where there's a lot more contractors, everyone has to work with others at some point in their adult lives. And in school, they're going to have to keep working with each other in groups. So this is something that we can reinforce and teach in our classrooms every day. Plus, it also teaches students tolerance. It can be hard to work with someone you don't get along. I mean, you and I know that. We've worked with difficult students when we were students. We've worked with difficult adults in various jobs, but we have to learn how to compromise. And students learn this well in groups. Now, of course, there are some downsides to working in groups. I'm not going to lie. It's not, this utopia when we have group work. More often than not, the more assertive, or, if you want to call them alpha students, they tend to take over. And even if that person is incorrect, they want to lead and have everyone follow them, even if it's off a cliff. So they've got this idea and they're positive it's right. And because they're just so assertive, everyone's like, okay, fine. And they just go along with it. And then the whole group is wrong. And everyone is very mad at that one student. Also, one student could end up doing all the work, and a lot of times not by choice. They may have group members that don't want to do anything, that are off task the entire time, and this one student doesn't want to get a bad and that one student doesn't want to get a bad grade, so they're just going to do all the work so that they can be done. And depending on the grouping, a student could end up having to teach the content to everyone, and they're not stretched or challenged. So if you remember, I mentioned that they inadvertently teach each other, which is a benefit of group work, but also it could end up where, because they spend so much time just teaching the basics and teaching what they already know, they didn't have time to push themselves and explore. And also, I'm not going to lie, group work can be difficult to manage. This is why some teachers are uncomfortable with the controlled chaos involved with any type of group work. And let's be honest, not all students can handle this. For some students, the moment that you assign them group work, they want to goof off. They are asking if they can come up with their own groups. They're talking across class. They feed off of that controlled chaos, and they just can't focus. It's almost just like, oh, I get a mental break now that I don't have to be quiet. It's quiet time. Now, a lot of times though, I have found that happens when students have to sit for a really long time without getting a chance to talk. If they just have to listen or be lectured at for a stretch, then you give them group work, they just have to release and empty the cup before they can possibly come back and be on task. And finally, with group work, introverts, they don't really have much of a say or much power. They often either secretly work alone, I'm sure you've seen that, or they get pushed around in a group, or the group decides on something and that introvert just kind of, nods their head but does their own thing, so they're not really working in a group. So, you have to decide if a certain assignment would benefit from cooperative learning or not. So, you want to ask yourself some questions about, with that skill or concept that you're learning, or that the students are learning, is it something that they can just practice on their own? Do you want them to struggle with it with their peers first? So for me, when students are first learning a skill or a concept, we do it together as a class. I'm huge on the I do, we do, you do model. I really have found that for all levels, even with my accelerated, it really benefits their learning. So, we do it together as a class, and then they work on it in groups. When everyone is fumbling around trying to work it out, it's actually less threatening for the students when they make a mistake, because they're working it out and it's one of their peers who's like, okay, yeah, oh no, I think you missed that step, or when you were multiplying, you forgot to move over the decimal, or something like that. It's a lot less threatening for them to make that mistake in the group than when I call on them and they made that mistake. So a lot of class time is spent on working cooperatively in groups in my class. And I've also found that in terms of grouping, 3 to 5 works best. Fewer than 3, and it's just partner work, right? Or they're working individually, and more than 5, it's a mess. Someone always seems to be left behind and forgotten in larger groups, so I would keep the size manageable. And in terms of how to group students, this is a huge discussion, and there's so many different ways that you can group students. So I just want to tell you my observations. First, I think it's important to give introverts a choice with whom they work. It's already exhausting for them to interact so much, but they'll have an easier time speaking up if they're friendly with their group members, or if there's someone that they feel safe and comfortable with. In fact, I'm going to tell you, there have been times when I've grouped introverts together. I originally thought that they weren't as engaged, and it felt really strange, and I felt bad because everyone around them was talking and working excitedly. But then when I would talk to that group, they were actually super grateful to be able to have that headspace to work without a more gregarious group member talking over and talking endlessly. So the kind of direction that I gave that group was, I want you guys to discuss the problem or the question, what you think your answers might be, maybe come to a consensus, which would be nice, and then write your answers individually. But you don't have to be talking the whole time. It could be as simple as, what did you get? So they will have that headspace, which I think is really important, especially for introverts. Something else to consider is grouping students by ability. And I know this is pretty controversial, and you're probably thinking, okay, seriously, Kim? But I just want you to hear me out on this. So we've all been in a situation where there's a low, medium, and high student in each group. Okay? That's actually probably one of the most common groupings. The higher students tend to take over and resent having to teach everything to or slow down for the other students. The lower students are too embarrassed to ask for help because all of the other students seem to, quote unquote, get it, and they are taking the lead on the conversation. But if you group by ability, you can differentiate accordingly. So if you have a lower group, you could do small group instruction or review and scaffold accordingly. And then if you have groups that excel, you can give them supplementary work to stretch them. Okay. Now, you could also do a mix. So you could, some days, depending on the type of task, if they're learning this for the first time and it's something that's pretty complex, maybe you want to do ability grouping. But if it's something that they're practicing that you guys have worked on before and it's like a review, then you can do more mixing. But regardless of which you choose, please, please, please don't punish your conscientious students by putting a problem student next to them. I think we're all guilty of doing this. It just really sucks for that conscientious student, and they're going to resent you for it. The more studious student will also be stifled by the lower level student. It just makes sense though, since that higher student has to slow down and re-explain things. And it probably seems like suicide to put more disruptive students with their disruptive peers, but you can still put them in a different grouping. I just lost my page. It probably seems like suicide to put more disruptive students with their disruptive peers, but you can still put them in a different group that, number one, is more on their level, and number two, would be willing to advocate for themselves. So just consider that. It's just so easy to put them next to someone who is a positive role model because you're hoping that'll rub off on them. I haven't found that happens very often, honestly. And when it's time for me to assess their progress, this is when students work alone. I don't grade group work, only work they do alone. And so the students will say, does this count on our grade? Should we turn this in? And I tell them over and over, no, you did it as a group. I don't know if it was your brain that produced the work on that paper, so I'm not going to grade group work. And you might be wondering if it means that they don't do the work, but because I'm circulating the entire time, and because I use a random calling system when we answer out, the students stay on task and complete the work. And so, I don't want students to just copy what everyone else has and then pass it off as their own. I need to see what their level of proficiency is. And that's mainly why I wait for individual work in terms of what goes in the gradebook. If you're going to have your student work in groups, make sure you also know the difference between cooperative and collaborative learning. If they're working together but they're producing their own work on their own worksheet or device, it's cooperative. And if all members are contributing to a final product together, which is what a lot of people think of with group work or a group project, that's collaborative. Okay, so again, if they're doing collaborative work, you need to ask yourself, how will you track who did what? What I love about using Google Classroom to disseminate assignments is that you can track who edits. So if all students are working on a presentation in Google Slides, you can see who did what, who changed which slide. And what I also have students do is I have them put their name on the products that they themselves or specifically created or worked on. So this would mean that if I worked on slides 3, 12, and 22, then those slides would have my name either directly on them or in the speaker notes. And you also want to check in with them every day to see who's accomplishing what. So what I do is I keep a clipboard or an online spreadsheet for keeping track, and you could assign daily points if you want, if it makes it easier in terms of keeping them accountable for their work. Also, this is really important, you want to plan out how the work will be divided. Doesn't mean who's going to do it, but how the work will be divided. Because I've learned this so many times, students don't naturally know how to do that equitably. And either the alpha student will take over or pick the one that they want to do, or the students will waste time with indecisiveness. So split up the different tasks for them and then let them decide who is going to do what. Okay, a way of keeping everyone working is to have an individual part that all students work on, or, why did I say that? A partner section, and then maybe a section where everyone's checking and assessing each other's work. So that way each person contributes their own, plus it's a collaborative effort. I've seen where some people get jobs and one of the jobs is to check everybody else's work. Well, then you're waiting for everyone to finish and you're not really doing much in the meantime. And shouldn't someone check your work as well? So it's really best if everyone is responsible for checking each other's work. And also make it so that, for a collaborative project, that you grade in a fair way. And you might consider assigning an additional individual part, like a reflection, or maybe individual research or analysis that you grade based on the standard or skill that you're assessing. And then have them apply that part to the group project, which I would recommend being worth less, since even with all of the recommendations I gave, you still don't really know who did what. Someone might have gone in and, made everything better or decided that they wanted to take over and have it their way and changed it. A lot of teachers I mentioned, they do like to assign roles in groups, such as like a scribe, a timekeeper, maybe a materials person or a leader. And if you do go this route, assign roles that are meaningful. For example, if students are working on a collaborative project, a timekeeper can be handy, but a product checker is a boring job if they don't get to do anything until the end. Remember how I mentioned that? And also, unless it's just a discussion, a timekeeper is going to be bored throughout this process because all they're doing is watching the time. And if you're going to go this route though, because it does make sense with the particular assignment that you're giving, it also helps to have visuals so that students can regularly refer back to what their role is. So I've seen teachers who have the roles and responsibilities laminated, and they have like a set for each group so that they can look back and say, oh yeah, I'm supposed to do that. So you can also make a poster that everyone can look at. You then want to check in regularly to be sure that students are following their roles. It takes some training, but students get the hang of it pretty quickly. My students mainly work cooperatively and are discussing together but working individually, so I don't give out roles. I've tried using roles in collaborative groups, but I also found that some students get stuck with a certain role because they spoke up last or they forgot that they have a role and they just dive into the conversation or into the work. And one role is completely forgotten. For example, like materials person, the person who has to get the box full of stuff. Sometimes they forget they're in charge of that and somebody else was just being considerate and does it anyway. It can just be a mess if you're not comfortable with doing that all the time. Now, whether or not students have roles, it's important that they also come up with norms. So you can either do this as a class or you can have each group do it. Reminding them of these norms it really helps with accountability and staying on task. Some good norms that you could use involve, stay on task, contribute fully, put forth your best effort in your particular part of the assignment, things like that, just to remind them to be a good group member. They don't always remember that. And just as teachers need norms and working together, so do our students. They too would rather socialize or doodle or play games. I've seen teachers play games during staff meetings, playing games on their phone, because we don't have norms. Many teachers, let me tell you, they are on their phones, they are grading, they're doing all kinds of stuff during professional development or staff meetings, and you've seen someone do it. So teach students how to set norms and self-monitor to see if they're following those norms, okay? If you have students that refuse to work with their group, deal with them individually. Don't shame them in front of the group. I actually find this a lot in my accelerated classes. I'd mentioned that before. Those students, they just want to work alone because they can get the work done faster. However, faster isn't always better, and those students tend to make mistakes without knowing it. And again, they only find out when we correct the assignment in class, or maybe a week or two later when I finally return the assignment. So talk to those individuals, don't do it in front of the group, and emphasize the importance of why they need to work with their group. And sometimes I've had some students that are really defiant, they really don't want to work with their group, and I let them know that it does affect their citizenship grade as well. So whether or not they do it, willingly or begrudgingly, they have to work with their group. You might find that you also have a student that, I don't like that. So whether or not they do it willingly or begrudgingly, they have to work with the group. And I do appreciate their passion for their own opinion. And these students, though, you never know. Sometimes maybe they just want to work individually for a particular part on an assignment, but I still encourage them and I coach them on how to be a good group member, in addition to letting them know, group work, participation, all part of your citizenship grade. So I know that a lot of you like to do group work, and hopefully this is a good review for you or a good reminder for you, or maybe you've been resistant or scared of group work up to this point because you've seen it fall apart. And I hope that you'll be able to use these tips in terms of how to structure your group work, and also just knowing the benefits of doing it, because I am a huge fan of it, and I have found that my classes tend to be really engaging because students, they do work together, they get a chance to work it out, and we have some really lively discussions. And it's reading and writing, folks, a subject that a lot of students really hate, and they always look forward to coming to my class. So if you're someone that's on the fence about group work, I'm hoping that this particular episode will kind of push you over onto the group work side. So again, don't forget to fill out that survey. It's teachersneedteachers.com/survey. And please, please, please complete that so that I can come up with even better episodes for you and I won't run out of ideas. Thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with me today. I hope you have a fabulous week.